One of the worst things to see in the weather forecast during turkey season is bad weather. Or maybe you just wake up to your alarm in the morning excited to hear some gobblers on the roost, only to realize that there's a lot of rain pounding your roof outside. Or you look outside and you see trees almost bending over double because the wind is gusting 30 miles per hour. All right, well, they're probably not bending over that much, but you get the point. The wind is just howling out there. Now, you might be tempted to just hit the snooze button, stay in bed, and go another day, but you might be making a big mistake. Just because it's raining or the wind is really howling out there, that does not mean that turkeys aren't out doing their normal day-to-day things. Turkeys do still have to eat, and they still need to chase hens. So in this video, we're going to go over some tips to hunting during those really windy and rainy days. But before we go over these tips on how to hunt during these two crappy weather days, do me a favor, and if this is your first time on my channel, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you click that bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload a video. And the first crappy turkey hunting weather we're going to go over first, I said it twice, is how to hunt turkeys during those really wet and nasty rainy days. And not only does the rainy days mess with the turkeys, it's going to mess with you too. Now, unless you've got some really good rain gear, you are limited to hunting out of a blind, or you just suffer through some wet clothes. Now, during those really rainy mornings, turkeys are probably going to stay up on the roost a lot longer than normal, and they are going to head toward those open fields, or at least they tend to head towards open fields. They will also be a lot quieter when they're wet, so don't get discouraged if you aren't hearing many gobbles. So grind it out and sit on those field edges on rainy mornings, especially if that field has very short vegetation. It's exactly what I did to tag my tom last Sunday. I was hunting on the edge of a clover food plot. I think it has a little weed in there, and I just grinded it out. I sat in my blind. It rained off and on all morning, and finally around 9:30, 10 o'clock, a single tom came into my setup. The turkeys had been quiet all morning. I think whenever it would start to die off, the rain would really kind of peter out. I'd hear some gobbles off on my neighbor's property, and then the rain would pick up again, and then I wouldn't hear anything. And I just sat there. I knew if I just stayed there, something would come along, and it paid off. And it really is true that patience kills more birds than anything else. When that rain is falling pretty hard, it can make it very hard for turkeys to hear your calls. It's one of the few times that I'm going to recommend that you make sure your calls are a little bit louder and call more often. Use a box call or a pot call that allows you to reach out further. It's got a little sharper sound to it. Again, it's one of the few times I'm going to recommend that you get louder and more often. If that rain dies down or even quits, soften those calls up and switch to some more of your different calls to see if you can get a tom's attention. Now, when it's raining outside, it is very important that you try to protect your strikers and your pot calls from getting wet. Keep a Ziploc bag and even a small towel in your vest for these rainy days. It's inevitable that you're going to get a drop or two on your pot call on the surface of that. Your strikers might get a little damp, and then you're going to want to dry that off and recondition it, because otherwise, if that stuff gets wet, they are just useless. It's also a good idea to have a box call that is chalkless. I know that the chalked box calls do sound better, but if they get wet, it's, again, going to be useless. So it's a good idea to have that chalkless box call as a backup. The real key to tagging a tom on these rainy days is just to be out there, be patient. And, it's something that you're probably going to get tired of hearing me say, but again, patience is the most important thing when it comes to any kind of turkey hunting, whether or not the weather is good. So most important, find a good spot to where you can stay comfortable and dry so you can stay out there as long as you need to. And the second crappy turkey hunting weather we're going to talk about is those terrible high wind days. Oddly enough, hunting turkeys during those high wind days is a lot like hunting turkeys during rainy days. When the wind is up, they're going to move towards more open fields, more open ground, but they may roost in the valleys, or they may head straight to those valleys once they fly down out of the roost to kind of protect themselves from the wind a bit. Now, the perfect place to go, in my opinion, the perfect place to go during these high wind days is open fields down in the bottoms. That combines the best of both worlds. An open field so they can see far because they can't hear very well, and the valley to kind of shield them a little bit from the wind. Now, they're going to be a little more skittish during these high wind days, like I said, because they can't hear very well and they can't, see very well. They can't pick out a lot of stuff. Every tree and shrub is going to be swaying in the wind, so they're going to be on high alert. This also gives you a little more of an opportunity to get a little closer for a shot, because if all the trees and shrubs are moving, all the bunch grasses are swaying in the wind, you can get away with a little bit more movement, but you still have to be very careful. And just like on those rainy days, your calls need to be a little louder and more frequent to really get their attention. Stick with the box calls or just any call that can get really high pitched. So if you can use your pot calls, your box call, or even your mouth calls. The important part is that you get a little higher of a pitch so you can really cut through that wind. So that was some quick tips to hunting during 2 very crappy but possibly productive weather conditions. Like I said earlier, I actually tagged a tom during a decent rainstorm. That's Sunday morning. So don't hit that snooze button and wait for another day. We only get so many days during turkey season, so don't waste your opportunities. If you got any more tips for hunting turkeys in terrible weather conditions, leave those down in the comments below. Hit that like button if you liked this video, share it if you found it helpful, and make sure that you are subscribed so you can stay informed.